particularly excited to introduce the first speaker, Kevin Murphy. When I first started as a very young professor here at Canisius College, I had 3 students in my animal behavior program, and one of them was Kevin Murphy. So he's one of my a proud alum. When he graduated from Canisius, he joined the Buffalo Zoo as an education department, and then right after that immersed himself in the world of husbandry and animal management, first as a keeper, and then he became the animal curator at the Buffalo Zoo. From there, he moved to Maryland Zoo, where he now is in charge of captive management techniques and animal facilities. Kevin is a person with a passion for animal diversity and a love of nature, and he has a long history in his own career of turning that into really dynamic animal displays that he himself has developed. Kevin Murphy.
Thank you. It's my privilege to be here today. Conservation. That term, even in our own field, has a wide variety of meanings. It's kind of amusing to me, the title of my talk indicates that I might not feel that zoos 50 years from now will have a conservation core mission. This actually couldn't be further from the truth. If zoos 50 years from now don't have conservation as part of their core, they probably won't exist. I believe in zoos, in case there's any question of that. I believe in zoos. I just think that we've kind of drifted in a direction away from where I think our core conservation values should be. My fear is that if we continue that drift in 50 years, we not only will lose what we're seeking, which is to prevent extinctions from a wide variety of animals, we'll also lose our only asset, which is our collections. Since the formation of the SSPs, the Species Survival Plans, which are an incredibly dynamic, ongoing, complicated captive breeding program, the challenges in species survival plans are amazing, and so people outside the zoo field may not recognize how challenging they can be. But since the formation of those, there's been a zoo arc mentality. I remember when I first walked into the zoo field 28 years ago, I love working with animals. I get to work with animals, and the possibility of releasing them back into the wild, what can be better than that? Truly amazing. It's inspiring. It's inspired me my whole career. The zoo has evolved through its courses along those lines in the last 25 years or so and found many challenges in the SSPs. I think most zoo professionals now recognize that for most of our species, it's not tenable to say that we're going to put them back in the wild. And yet still, the arc is out there. We still are portrayed as arcs. Just the other day, I asked a group of 14-year-olds, what is a zoo's mission? And they regurgitated me back the arc concept as though they read it out of a book. So we're doing a good job with what we're telling people we're doing. And that's certainly, as Jeff Bonner has pointed out and others have pointed out, that is certainly what our goal is. But I maintain that predominantly we are not an arc. We can never be an arc. That comes from a base of reality. I work in the trenches, if you will, every day. And the challenges on my level of zoo are insurmountable to think that we have the space to be a true arc. Does that mean in 50 years, I don't think there'll be releases of animals into the wild from captive breeding programs? No, I certainly hope that continues. I would never say we should stop doing that. I just don't think we can frame our entire mission, our entire resources on that concept. I don't feel it's tenable. The idea of zoos lacking space is not a new concept. Space is a very fuzzy thing with a living collection. And when you work with a living collection, you recognize that space moves back and forth, and multiple species are dedicated to different spaces and different seasons and different years and different periods of crisis. And so space is very hard to define and dedicate to one endangered group of animals in typical zoos. David Hancock's actually talked about space in his essay in the Ethics on the Ark book. It is not tenable to think that we can save dozens and dozens, and in fact, hundreds and hundreds of species in the world's zoos. It is certainly something we strive for, something we want so badly, but it's not tenable. Space issues are exacerbated by surplus animal issues. We are population managers. And so, as many of the panelists have written in books and population managers talk about, we look for the benefit of the whole group, the whole species. And so when we say we can't cull animals when we need space and they're no longer viable in our genetic scheme or our demographic scheme, when we say we can't ship animals out to non-EZA institutions because they don't fit into what our ultimate goal is, which is the strongest genetically viable population of animals we can get. When we say we can't do those two things, everyone considers it an ethical issue. I get it. It is an ethical issue for the individual animals. But it's really, for us, a population management issue, and it stymies our goals. Couple that with extremely complicated breeding recommendations that take long periods of time. Couple that with extremely complicated transfers. There are many things that lead to the unsustainability of certain programs, or at least the mechanical chink in the cog of the wheel for certain programs. Dr. Conway wrote in an excellent article called Buying Time for Wild Animals that everyone should read. But I disagree with something he said about SSPs. He wrote that SSPs have been tried and, have been found to be difficult and left untried. I would disagree. I think they have been tried, and some of the problems have been left unsolved. And that is where we as institutions need to go after those problems and figure them out. In 2009, I think it was 2009, two researchers, Lees and Wilkin, point out and talk about zoo sustainability issues and how we are not able in the last 25 years to sustain our own collections into the future. That is obviously what we're striving for, as has been pointed out before by Dr. Bonner. We're looking for 100 years of good genetic material out of these species and really farther out than that. Lees and Wilkins talks about that sustainability issue, and they talk about it even though lots of science has been added to the zoo field. This is true. Ever since I walked in the door into the zoo world, we have improved continuously, and that is one of the things I love about my job. Every day, each one of us can make it better. So it can't happen all at once, but it's continued evolution. The thing about Lees and Wilkins' discussion of science is that these are living collections. When you throw numbers at them, it doesn't just make it work. There are compatibility issues, and everyone knows who works in the zoo field that zookeeping is science, yes, but there's also art to it. That's anecdotal, that's indefinable, but there is art to zookeeping. And I can excel at a species. I can nail all the requirements of the species. I can breed them at will. I can give a recipe to a colleague or 10 colleagues, and often, even if they're willing and able, they can't reproduce the success. That is a fuzzy thing that goes on in zoos sometimes, and it speaks to the specialization that Dr. Conway actually refers to in that same article, that when zoos specialize, when zoos focus on one thing, like the International Crane Foundation, or a zoo just picks a group of a certain kind of nocturnal geckos, and they focus on that long term, that is when we reach the heights of our greatest success. I am concerned that if we continue to push for only breeding endangered species or working with the most critically endangered species in our collections, we will drift further into smaller and smaller collections and reduce our greatest asset, which is our collection. People come to see animals. That's why people come to zoos. There was a discussion before about whether there'll be small zoos in the future. If there's no zoos nearby, I absolutely think there will be small zoos in the future. People want to see animals. They always have. That's what we provide to them. And we need to do it in a better and better way, obviously. My concern is that as we become smaller and smaller and more focused, especially if we're more focused on only the megavertebrates, if we become smaller and more focused on only a few species, we become more and more homogeneous, and people aren't going to, that's not going to be enriching for people, and our asset, which is what we show people and educate people about, will be diminished over time. Dr. Maple, who's not here, asserted in an essay one time that he feels it's great that zoo collections are getting smaller. I totally disagree. I certainly don't want to see haphazard collections from 25 years ago when curators would bring in fad species, breed them, and then send them all out the door and have no longevity for that species. But I do believe diversity is everything to a zoo. And I feel very strongly, as I sit on steering committees in the tags, that we are losing diversity for the sake of working with only a few species. Our collections are the only thing we have. If we don't have our collections, we're just zoo wannabes talking about the dying animals in the wild. Our collections are our powerful tool to talk about the devastation that's going on in the world. I advocate strongly that we circle the wagons, so to speak, around our collections. And don't give up on sustainability, but try to sustain our own collections into the future and not minimize it by just going after the crisis species. Another concern I have is we grow smaller and smaller in our collections. Our staff expertise declines. It's alarming to me, coming from the Buffalo Zoo, which has the most senior keepers on earth, I think, in terms of numbers of years of service. Most zoos don't have that. And as you get into the zoo field more and more, and people haven't worked with a tenth of the species you've touched in your life, that knowledge, that expertise goes away. And eventually, when all the senior people retire, we'll have a group of people with lost knowledge. I firmly believe that one of the biggest investments we need to make as zoological managers is in our staff, to gain staff depth and to transfer knowledge. It's not only that zoos don't have space that concerns me about the ARC concept. Conservation biologists also differ in how they feel about extinctions. Snyder and his colleagues feel very strongly that prophylactic or so-called prophylactic captive breeding is inappropriate. Breeding ahead of an extinction, he feels that captive breeding should absolutely be a last-ditch effort just before the animal can't handle it all anymore in the wild because of the genetic and phenotypic changes that take place in captivity. He feels those changes are a lot more significant than people usually give credence to. 1 minute? No kidding. Thank you. So what is the zoo's role? Dr. Conway maintains that we have a moral obligation, especially because we are not-for-profits. We have a moral obligation to protect wildlife. I wholeheartedly agree. But I also believe that we have probably an even stronger moral obligation to work with the collections we have and maintain them into the future. The problem I have with jumping on every crisis is there's too many of them. The amphibian crisis is a good example. I literally didn't know which species we should perhaps work with because then another more important one would come up. So I feel as though we need to just marshal our forces and have a long-range collection plan that will move past individual curators and directors into the future. In closing, we need to invest in our collection. We need to build more holding. we need to seriously invest in our conservation education programs and rehaul them, because our power is with our collections. And if we reach hundreds of millions of people, they can do more for the wild conservation than we ever can as individuals. A zoo's conservation core doesn't really lie in its captive breeding, it lies in its education potential.